there's a lot happening in the world, as it were. That the markets seem to having a Lazarus moment with this ETF news. So a lot to sort of keep up with there. Not getting a lot of sleep lately, but I think that applies to pretty much everyone in the space, right? I
Yeah, I
mean, it's
mean,
like
if you're really back, bro, forget
overload.
sleeping.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, if this is really the
Yeah, yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Ross, bro, I'm really excited to have you here. I know where relevant you are in the space,
Of
and
course.
today I want to be talking about DAOs,
All
bro.
right, Bert.
Okay?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, I suppose, but mostly good things. So I think kind of the context leading up to this call, and sort of what I tend to talk about on Twitter and elsewhere, is sort of how the law works with DAOs, and kind of with contract developers, and even security folks. I saw like an interesting tweet the other day where there was this hack, and then basically the protocol was saying like we've looped in like law enforcement, and like even like other criminal organizations are tracking you down. And it really is interesting. I would say that the sort of unholy alliance between sort of like cypherpunks and the legal system, occasionally we see even Bitcoiners like cheering on the SEC when it kind of fuds Ethereum as a security. So I think kind of what is relevant here is that like the legal layer, off chain is still quite relevant to our work as developers, building protocols that ideally have secure runtime, no interference, sort of permanent records. But then we actually see in reality that even things like the tornado cash protocol was effectively shut down through a legal sanction. So things I can talk about that I think are important and hopefully useful to people in open sense, and kind of that might listen to this recording is don't disregard the legal layer. The legal layer affects the human beings that run the protocols, the validators, the miners. If we look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these other chains as basically consensus, sort of law still affects how people come to consensus and how they view the incentives and participating in these things. So not to sort of bring any bad news. I don't think it's bad news at all. I think the legal system is easy to work with, easy to work around, but it is sort of an awareness issue that I've seen sort of in this space. And just bringing that awareness to bear, I think, has been relevant and sort of one of the more productive things I've been able to do over the past couple of years. So we can, launch into any sort of specific topics. People tend to talk a lot about like, liability for DAOs and all that stuff, but I think that's not the full story. I think, a lot of what I've been looking at more recently is just like the, personal sort of situation for contributors to DAOs. The personal situation for people that want to launch a new product that has like a token as part of its business model, what they're thinking about, in terms of law, and then how people are actually trying to exit the legal system itself, using good OPSEC, using ZK and other sort of interesting technologies. So yeah, I don't know if you want sort of me to rant for like half an hour, or if there's any like
This is quite
questions we can go
interesting.
into on this topic.
Yeah, this is quite interesting, the
Yeah,
whole
sure.
legal side of DAOs and crypto itself, because we're constantly fighting the system, and there's this huge pirate flag, over crypto, and it's really hard for us to know where's the line, how many taxes should I pay? And now I'm receiving all this money, not paying any taxes. At some point, I need to turn this into money that I can spend, right, to buy an apartment. And I know some places you can do that using crypto,
Hmm.
but but it's really strange because you have these experiments like Zuzalu that just happened. So these alternative societies,
Hmm.
no rules. How does I mean? Are we trying? Because bro, there's no running away from jurisdiction, right? We're gonna get regulated. You want it or not. So when do you think crypto will mature to that point?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's definitely starting with things like actually having territory, like the Zuzalu, Praxis, and these other sort of city-state experiments. And I think that recalls to a lot of history that like people that wanted to fork legal systems. Like America was founded essentially as a fork of a bunch of different European countries. Like the British colonists that came to the East Coast, the Spanish colonists, and so forth, the French colonists. A lot of these people just left because they had different political ideologies, or they wanted to practice religion in their own way. And I think that definitely is sort of familiar to what I'm seeing, where like people that use crypto and like use it, in a more deliberate way, not just as like a balance sheet asset, but like want to like, live and breathe crypto. They are trying to exit and sort of create their own sort of system. And the most practical way to do that is to sort of start small. And for territorial purposes, having a sort of city does seem like a natural extension of like we had all these conferences over the past couple of years. People meeting, having sort of the IRL stuff, and then I think the next logical thing is like maybe we don't have to do this like 3 times a year. Or what if we actually had like a home base somewhere where there's almost like an ongoing conference, or a way to actually live and work and use crypto, to actually like live and breathe and stuff. So I think that seems kind of natural in the progression of things, that like people that share similar interests, especially like political or economic interests, do tend to band together. That's been sort of the story since the dawn of dawn of time, that like people who generally want a new social contract, try to find ways to strike that new social contract. It is obviously pretty difficult to sort of start these things because we're all sort of under jurisdiction. We are bound by the terms of our existing social contracts. Like as an American citizen, I was born there. I'm presumed to have adopted sort of the deal of being a citizen, and you do have to sort of declare out of these systems to do it cleanly. But crypto is more, I would say, an extension of civil disobedience, in that people, because they can sort of protect their property in some ways, through the private key security, they can, have a different power balance with the legal system. I don't think it's, so easy, that you just have like a city state and then you expect the governments to leave you alone. The governments have their own sort of responsibilities and processes of the fun things, and it's not like they're trying to be oppressive per se. I mean, some are more deliberately oppressive, but in a lot of cases they expect that people pay their taxes so they can fund social goods, or highways that a lot of crypto people still use. So it does track, generally with like common sense, that like you get what you pay for, but you also have to pay for what you get. And a lot of people still enjoy the legal system and the benefits it provides, even if we think crypto is sort of the obvious solution to a lot of problems. And a lot of the problems are just generally like banking related. I think banking and also like fiat money like aren't necessarily a given of having like a legal system. So I think that's a really good sort of progression, that like we can kind of rationally say to governments and to courts that it is not 100% divine mandate that we have to use fiat currency to have an economy and to sort of coordinate. We can have a legal system, and we can also use crypto, and it's like all fine, right? So I think kind of that's actually the wave that I'm seeing right now, where like the IRS is like being a little bit more interested in the technology, probably to find tax cheats, but they'll also probably automate ways to collect taxes, which might be convenient for some people. We're seeing, a little bit more experiment with like the digital infrastructure bill, where they want to kind of combine the SEC and CFTC jurisdiction to make it a little bit more efficient to try and apply those laws to crypto. So I think there's a little bit of an acceptance arc that I find interesting. But yeah, I think crypto in this next upcoming American election, for the presidency, will also be sort of a hot topic issue, and sort of a way that Republicans try to leverage against Democrats right now. So it's an interesting moment. I would say, like a lot of like crypto people like care more about like you said, like how do you pay your taxes? How do you find tax advantage ways to hold crypto. I think those are all definitely interesting. We can go into those. Company setup. these are not so new. People that have created businesses like e-commerce businesses have found good ways to create sort of offshore or tax advantage ways to fundraise and hold their loot. So those are all cool. It's not so unique, like I said, to crypto. But yeah, the liability thing I think has like sort of clued people into the risk of just like joining any sort of club on the internet. If the club has some sort of product or service, people try to like usually treat them like a business. And if you treat something like a business, I think it gets a little bit more complicated, tax wise and like what you actually have to prepare for if you offer something to the public. So what I've recommended in a lot of ways to sort of developers and people that want to have, like I said, a token as part of their business or their DAO is to sort of have simple ways to just sort of put a name that's not their own name or the name of the collective, the individuals on their app or the privacy policy, but just put a simple legal entity. Those can be set up without paperwork in some cases, and then that can establish sort of a logical separation between the kind of the cool things they're doing and anyone that might be weird and try to start like a class action suit just to shake the tree and get money out of it. So yeah, these aren't new issues, but I think for crypto people, they just assumed that like it because our economy and market is so small that people wouldn't really try and use the legal system against it. They are, currently testing a lot of these things, right? Sorry, I know
Yes.
that's a lot,
No,
but
no,
like
no.
I'm
That's
kind of
actually,
pacing, and I have this
bro.
like
No, this
cat
is
meowing in the
amazing.
background.
I
So
have
sorry.
like 10 different questions for you. One thing that I want to talk about, which may be not so related, is consensus. Okay, or so because
Mm,
in my head, when we talk about proof of work, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, from the legal standpoint, I'm investing energy, I'm paying the taxes for energy, blocks are being mined, and people are being paid. That's okay. When I speak about proof of stake, it gets a little bit foggy. You know, we can just start to talk about the Ethereum Premine, Waxlang, like the Chinese company that invested a lot of money in consensus and helped bootstrap Ethereum itself. And now we have this change
yeah,
to
I mean,
proof
we
of
can talk about
stake. I
that.
mean, can we talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I think if you want to talk about like Ether and the pre-mine and how Ethereum, the network was launched, it definitely isn't the best blueprint to launch a new network these days. I think the consensus of many crypto lawyers and like the SEC obviously was that that was a sort of unregistered sale of securities because the network wasn't fully sort of deployed or built at the time. The ETH Foundation and others were sort of doing the crowd sale. I'm not a narc. I think like the securities legal regime is like very unconstitutional from my own perspective. That might be a libertarian perspective, but I think it does sort of like lie in sort of rationality. But regardless of what I think or my like political beliefs, these laws apply, and they're just kind of like bumps in the road to just watch out for. So yeah, I think sort of the pre-mine, the crowd sale are complicated, but what I think we can also demonstrate and sort of point to as an example with Ethereum is that regardless of how it started, as it currently stands, it is, quote unquote, sufficiently decentralized. And there isn't a very logical reason to classify it as a security, because even if you said Ether is a security, who's going to file statements to the SEC? The ETH Foundation? Does the ETH Foundation actually have any sort of great insider information at this point that the public really needs to know? If the ETH Foundation is held liable for things, does that actually help people? Are there other actors? I think it's gotten to the point where there isn't a single entity that can be held, ultimately responsible for the entire network. So it has sort of moved past the point where it's like reasonable to try and regulate it that way. So yeah, I think kind of like if you can look at that sort of progression and accelerate it in some respects, and by accelerate it probably just means like don't have a pre-mine or like a centralized allocation. You can avoid that easy sort of speed bump by just saying like there is no sort of centralized control or sort of collusion that people can point to say that everyone that holds the tokens or is participating in the network is sort of beholden to that actor. You need like a sort of fair, sort of game set up for it to be playable without people saying you need the referee in the game to make sure that people aren't cheating. So yeah, I don't think it's like so complicated. I think people understand if something's centralized because they like watch the movement of the relevant actor or whale. So I think that's kind of easy for me. I actually worked for Consensus for a bit, and I would say like even though people act like Consensus was this like master plan or like had all the sort of the moves and yeah, I think that escapes reality. It's like Consensus, like a lot of early Ethereum actors, was kind of like exploring and making things up as they go along, because like we didn't really know like all the use cases that would like catch on or that were worth it to sort of consumers. Spending the gas to actually enter the network is still a little bit of a hurdle. So I mean, I don't think people expected like DAOs and DeFi, when I was working there, to be sort of worth it for a lot of people. But here we are. And I think that's cool. I think it's cool that like we're all participating in sort of this tech, and nobody I think has a really clear idea or advantage yet at this point. I don't know if like BlackRock and these like more trad guys like are gonna like clean the floor because they're like really used to adversarial thinking. But I think that's good for the system. Like the more people that we add, the better, overall. But yeah, I think that's sort of the story. I could tell like legally. If you do a sale of a token, it is really easy to say that's an investment of money, so that hits the first sort of Howie prong. And then, yeah, clearly, if there's a sale, usually the proceeds of that sale go to somebody. So if the proceeds of the sale go to like a company, it's really easy to point at that company as what people are relying on to sort of make sure the network or the quote unquote enterprise succeeds. So yeah, I think that just like injects speculation into the equation. What's kind of cool and interesting, I had sort of this like long ass thread the other day about it, is that like app chains are sort of a product and a technology that add like instant utility to tokens. So like a gas token has utility because as you understand, you need it to actually interact with that network. So you kind of cross that chasm of it not being purely speculative. It is sort of useful by its own right. So I think it's kind of cool that like we might see another sort of ICO wave where like we'll have a bunch of tradable tokens that have utility because they're useful to run apps on their own chains. Like utility tokens to use a smart contract on Ethereum were pretty dumb when we had like the first ICO wave. But a utility token to actually access a network is at least a little bit less dumb. I don't think it's like that smart, I would say. But I can't like forecast or like really predict everything, right? So like maybe it will end up being smart, but my impression is that it's still like a little bit silly to have like all these different chains for different smart contract applications. But I'm willing to see how it works, right? That's the whole point of all this, is like to build it in prod, and that like nobody is an expert, and like we can have all these different sort of like monetary experiments and economic experiments at the same time without waiting for the Fed to like say it's like okay to do that. So I think that's cool, and like the legal experimentation is good because like I think we've identified the pain points, because we've just had Ether and all these other tokens sitting around for like the past 5 to 10 years, and they've tried all the arguments. So we've been able to sort of like take the arguments, the sort of early case law, at least in terms of the enforcement actions, and just like apply that to how we're developing these new products or like these sort of new investable formats, and kind of seeing how that works and see what the regulators say next. We can go into that too, like what I think regulators would say about like these app chain tokens and all that stuff. But yeah, definitely don't want to like over talk or
No, bro, this is
say
amazing.
too much. That's
This is amazing.
I'm trying.
One thing that is curious for me is how the US is currently changing his view on crypto and how we're even getting rid of carrying how we even getting rid of carry, right? And in the audience, the judge was talking. So you created all these laws that kept the US behind all these countries regarding, technology development and crypto. Why this is happening? Why are we trying to get closer now?
Sorry, my internet was kind of bad. I'm kind of in I'm literally in a bathroom right now. Sorry.
No problem.
Are you saying like why we have all these laws about
No, no, no.
crypto?
Why
Or,
are
like,
we changing
is,
our instance, regarding crypto? Why is the US getting closer to crypto now? Because we're getting rid of Gary, we're looking more into,
uh,
we're changing a few laws. Looks
yeah,
like the country is looking into evolving, adapting, and retaining the technology.
yeah. I think I would agree with that impression. I think it kind of like there's a game of chicken, I would say. Like the SEC hasn't really talked about the useful applications at all. They've been so focused narrowly on like promoters and like scams that there has been sort of this gaslighting, I would say, by like the federal agencies. But crypto is very much a populist technology, and it is like almost inherently democratic. Anybody can join and like validate Ethereum today. You even earn an income that way, which is kind of cool. People can join DAOs, and like I think kind of like we're seeing senators and like other people like speak favorably about it and like actually talk about like you can use a smart contract to do cool things, which is cool. But they've been largely like kind of like drowned out by like the scams and like FTX and all these other things. But the enlightenment curve, I think, has been like the biggest scams have not been technology related, but just like typical like .com boom
Yeah.
busts, sort of like shell companies or like
It
shitty
connect.
promoters. So I think yeah, these people that are like making these laws live through that, and I think like generally like some of them are good faith. I don't really see Brad Sherman or others engaging in this technology or the topics in good faith. But I think like if you really look at the U.S. power structure and also geopolitically, if I was like actually, more Machiavellian and within the sort of U.S. System, I would say like we're not going to fall on our sword and destroy our empire just to save the banks. The banks screwed us over already. The banks don't fully control the game. The game is more in terms of like territory occupation and the American military presence around the world. It is a national security risk to sort of ignore crypto because the bankers don't like it. The U.S. empire is not going to fail because of the banks. So I think like there's an enlightenment curve just on that sort of Machiavellian point that like if the cypherpunks haven't given up at this point and like been scared, their technology and their best minds will be applied against the U.S. interests by sort of China and these other not adversaries per se, but like people that generally can take market share of humanity, as it were. So yeah, I think it kind of just makes sense for the U.S. to like actually take it seriously at this point because the game of chicken has failed. If they try to shut down these networks, they would show that they're actually frail and afraid of these sort of technologies, and they would go more viral. It's very similar to like when they were trying to shut down BitTorrent and the Pirate Bay, just over like music double spending, sort of copying MP3 files, like that clearly did not work because like people innately are attracted to things they're forbidden to do. So I think kind of like there's a basic psychology that like we've had enough market cycles and crypto has hit the news enough and not died repeatedly, and it's been fudded and people still like to use it. People definitely trade Ponzi coins or whatever, but like those Ponzi coins exist on a network and that network is still useful, even if it's like, people are launching shit tokens. So that network allows sort of like free sort of writing, and sort of like free, experimentation. And I think like people have to like figure that out at some point if it keeps happening. So that's my perspective, and that's more like in terms of like my impression, the gestalt of like the power structure of the U.S. and like how it tries to market its brand.
Nice.
And then yeah, kind of crypto's collision course with that. Yeah.
I'm really excited, bro. I have a few questions here. One question from Rosen is, in general, a DAO doesn't really have any specific or any guidelines by the SEC on how it should be structured. So must DAO just do what they believe they should do, or incorporate their DAOs in some non-jurisdiction country like the Bahamas or Bermuda. There are some good guidelines already out there by the WEF and Vitalik's articles. How likely would be it to be adopted as general guidelines by the SEC or authorities?
Yeah. So you mean the SEC? So like
Yeah,
the
like
SEC did have like the DAO report on like the original DAO, and I think that was like actually like pretty good in terms of like what it wants to see. The DAO itself was, arguably a little bit centralized. Like Slockit was a company based out of Europe that helped build the code and deploy it. And as I recall, they also had some special administrative privileges. So I think the SEC was kind of just looking at that template for DAO launch and sort of DAO operations, and just saying that looks a lot like a company. And yeah, I think definitely hit the SEC's radar because of the amount of money that was involved. I don't think the legal analysis really changes for like any of the current DAOs, but a lot of them have done a good job of doing fair distribution, just retroactive airdrops based on like you're a user of our app for a long time, so you should have some sort of stake in governance. I think that like kind of tracks a lot better than sort of an investment participation format. So I think that's kind of like already sort of like a good sort of template, and the SEC hasn't really needed, in my opinion, to offer any new guidance because generally an investment is an investment no matter what you kind of involve, whether it's tokens or whatever. So yeah, if a DAO is launched more as an investment opportunity, then the current guidance applies quite well. DAOs that are more natively distributed, like I said, to their users, where you can earn sort of power. I think those definitely are outside of typical investments, and I don't think the SEC has a lot of interest in those. The SEC has made complaints against like Rari Capital, that token, as well as like a couple others that are, definitely DAOs, at least technically. But I think the SEC and these guys generally just like look very closely at founders who might have a large proportion of the tokens, and generally just direct the protocol. They want perhaps an unrealistic thing, which is almost a headless protocol where like there's like nobody in charge. That is actually very hard to do. Human nature tends to centralize around certain people or certain interests. But the SEC is basically trying to say that as long as there is a sort of centralization of interests in a leadership structure that's like pretty formal, they will treat it like any other company. So I think that kind of works in a lot of ways, and we as DAOists or cypherpunks or whatever, we should try to embrace DAO formats that like are not so rigid. Or if people want to have an on-chain company, that's cool. But they should be like a little bit more clear that it's not really a DAO and that they're running a company, and that's fine. Right. So I think that's kind of my impression. People that are incorporating DAOs, I think that, like I said, that's a good strategy, just to have a basic way to alleviate the liability concerns of running a protocol, like regardless of like whether it's going to be regulated or not. If a user loses their funds because they did something stupid, some users might just file frivolous lawsuits. Not all lawsuits are good lawsuits, right? Some of them are like very dumb and would likely fail. But even like the annoyance of defending a lawsuit is like enough of a hassle that like I think it's nice to have an entity, or at least like a plan in place to just say like this is what we'll do if this happens, and we'll retain this law firm. There's nothing stopping a DAO though, from having a proposal and just hiring a law firm. Like I think it's kind of weird, in my opinion, that like the UkiDAO litigation, that the UkiDAO itself didn't just like hire some lawyers to defend it in court and just have a named defendant, just like somebody that just like volunteers. But yeah, I think we kind of have lacked a lot of strategic thinking and adversarial thinking, at least with regard to legal risk. I think that adversarial thinking is definitely in play now, and like there's a lot of good people like Gabe Shapiro and LexPunk have like published their DAO defense or DAO operator manual. I think there's like a lot of good strategic considerations in that. LEXDAO, myself, other sort of engineers that also sort of moonlight as lawyers, we've deployed smart contracts that make it easier to sort of envelop or use limited liability via LLC as well as unincorporated nonprofit association agreements. So there's ways to sort of like manage these risks, to manage these risks in a way that like doesn't require too much hassle. Like the more friction that I've seen in terms of legal setup, some founders and some developers just like don't do it at all. So it's like it's better to have some sort of plan or like some sort of entity than to not have anything, in my opinion. But my goal, at least in the space, is like cost or annoyance or just social awkwardness should never be a factor in whether or not you can protect yourself, right? So yeah, I think sort of that's an approach that will win the day. It's just like strategic thinking, and then ideally you never have to use these things. They're just nice to have, and sort of just like these passive things that DAOs employ. That's sort of my impression at least. Yeah.
Amazing, buddy. Amazing. Amazing, buddy. I have one more question here. There are DAOs that started very
Mhm.
big from raises like BitDAO. Does the market cap of the project, TVL, is the best indicator to know that DAO is the best, besides the fact that it should check project assets, who are the owners and who are the teams?
Yeah. Um, I mean, like TVL is a great metric because, like, in a lot of ways, that's the whole purpose of a DAO is like allocate capital, to be a proposal. Um, but it is a question of like, why was the DAO formed? If the DAO doesn't have a good mission in place, then you created like a large treasury that's just going to get slowly drained over time. And I don't think that's necessarily like a public good. It might be a public good if it's like all the locked ether and it's basically like everyone who holds ether is benefiting from this locked capital that's slowly draining from a DAO treasury. Like I don't know if that's like a way to sort of feel better about it. But yeah, I think generally, having a large treasury obviously isn't enough if the DAO and the treasury are not being applied to anything useful or just like paying like consultants and like having things happen off chain only. Like I think that's like not a very inspiring use case. It's just like paying people to sort of like think about the DAO rather than like doing things. But yeah, I think there's like obviously like also good groups. Like I think like Lobster DAO is a nice group. Like I don't even think they've like deployed a smart contract or like or have a token, but yet they're just like a great collection of minds. And I think OpenSense like other groups like definitely like rest on the human capital, and that is always going to be more valuable than money. I'm not saying that's in some romantic notion. It's just like
Yeah.
people change outcomes. Always people change outcomes.
You know, a lot of people suggested me to turn this into a DAO, but I have no idea on how to make it, and I'm super scared, of somehow being seen as some sort of scam or token. So yeah, I wanted you
I
to
think
go
yeah,
on.
there's a way, but yeah, I think probably making it non-transferable to start and like more of like a you earn it or it's like an NFT you hold just like the keep track that you're in the group sort of thing makes sense to me, right?
Can you explain for us? One last question for you. Can you explain for us LexDAO?
Yeah, I can explain LexDAO. Yeah, so like LexDAO started in like 2019. Myself and like some other crypto lawyers were like looking at smart contracts, and we realized like smart contracts were for sure going to change how we worked, what kind of how we run deals, how companies work. Corporate governance would probably become DAO governance. So we thought like first off like we shouldn't just be passive onlookers. We should actually use the stuff if we want to have any sort of credibility as crypto lawyers. So we deployed initially on Aragon. Like I just like deployed the DAO contract and just sent the token to like whoever would like listen to me. Like I just did like all these DMs and I was just like, hey, do you want to like create like basically a bar association of like crypto lawyers on chain? So we just like identify each other and then come to consensus on like what good law is, for crypto, and also like how to use smart contracts in a way that doesn't suck for like legal purposes. But yeah, we then sort of created social groups, Telegram, Discord, kept trying to build sort of our momentum around our ideas and, sort of experiment in the open, develop sort of proofs of concepts for, arbitration, using sort of like on-chain, panels like multi-sigs to resolve disputes. We're Raid Guild, other sort of like early DAOs in communities to sort of like incorporate, but also like think about if they're going to use like lawyers in law, can they do it in a way that like doesn't detract from the actual like experience of crypto and add new frustrations. So my whole thing though has been largely like how can I get lawyers to like evolve in a lot of ways, because like I wanted to sort of become more of a smart contract practitioner than like a corporate guy. And I think kind of the best thing about LEXDAO is like we do not bullshit about the technology. Like we very much are very deliberate, and if crypto is better than like a legal thing, we embrace the crypto part, right? So yeah, I would say LEXDAO is like an association of people like myself, these so-called legal engineers who want to sort of accelerate things a little bit. Actually make the legal system a little bit more fair, transparent, and actually operate well. There's a huge problem, with law that like only the rich can use the system, more or less. Like the legal system is literally it's supposed to serve everyone. The social contract is that everyone gets fair treatment, everyone gets the same benefits if you contribute. But that's not how it practically works, and that's honestly it's just like an operational efficiency issue that like only the rich can really afford to use such an inefficient and impractical system. So if we can like kind of reboot it and put more and more of the system into the blockchain, company filings as like NFTs, sending notices, using transactions, holding assets as groups and companies on chain, then I think like the legal system becomes instantly more affordable, easier to scrutinize, and easier to automate. And like at least me personally, like I see any resistance to that idea and that progression as like somewhat anti-human. So I do want to accelerate these things, and I want to make sure like LexDAO is there, as an institution and sort of an idea around that. And I think we do well. I've been very grateful for the quality of people that have contributed to the DAO over time. And I think the story of like Lex and DAO is just beginning in a lot of ways. So yeah, definitely glad to sort of tell that story as I can.
Amazing, buddy. Amazing. I mean, this is it. This was an amazing session with you. You have any closing thoughts? Any message you want to leave to people?
Huh. Closing thoughts. Yeah, I guess like something I was kind of picking back up yesterday is like there's this meme, code is law, right? And I think it like deserves like very good thought and analysis. And lawyers, hate that idea because it kind of displaces a lot of what they do. If you just say like code runs everything that lawyers used to do. But like something that I think people can appreciate is that even on the blockchain, even with so-called immutable smart contracts and systems, there are hard forks, there are upgrades, there are conditions that change, sort of these macro conditions. So code is law, but like sort of the code itself seems to be, at least in every blockchain that I've seen, even Bitcoin, subject to the consensus of the network. So when you look at it that way, you realize that the network resembles governance in terms of like government. It's more that people participate freely to say this is the state of the chain, these transactions are valid, and that is sort of the truth of the matter. And what guides people, is not code per se. It is their notion of fairness, and what incentivizes them to keep participating in that network. That is very much a legal system. It is just like a little bit better, I would say, because it's like free to join and exit. So code is law, but the code itself is law, basically. I don't think anyone can really disagree with that if they examine all that's happened on the blockchain so far. maybe we reach a point where, AI and sort of the consensus and the way we interject subjectivity and settling transactions and disputes is automated truly and autonomous and not subject to human interference. And then code truly can be law because code is embodied by an artificial intelligence. But until we reach that, state of consensus, it will very much be human driven and political. So human driven political is, very much legal. It is much better. It's an advancement over current legal system. It's a 2.0 sort of achievement that, like, even though humans are reaching consensus, the way they are collaborating is very much transparent, and everybody knows the rules of the game they're participating in. You don't have pork barrel politics or this sort of, weird manifestations of lies that we see in so many political systems these days. But yeah, it's still very human. Um, so that'd be sort of my parting thought here.
Amazing, buddy. Thank you so much for coming up today. It was really a pleasure to have you
Oh,
here.
my pleasure.
And I dropped the link to
Yeah,
LEXDAO on the general chat, so everybody go check it out. Okay, also follow Ross on Twitter.
yeah. Join us.
And thank you so much, brother. Thank you so much. Stay